Now, normally we think about corruption as a one-dimensional problem, and this is strongly jammed into our minds by conventional concepts, theories, and metrics, all coming from the West. And the best example of this is called the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, right? It's released every year, extremely influential, always quoted in the media by policy and business leaders, and almost taken as a kind of universal God-given truth, right? What the CPI does is that it gives every country a single corruption score. So 90 or 45. And if you look at the rankings, no surprise, the top 10 cleanest country are all geographically concentrated, right? Among these OECD, Western countries, a few Asian countries, like my own country, Singapore, manages to get into the top 10. But the most corrupt countries are always the global South. Many countries in Africa are ranked at the bottom. So whenever you look at these scores, the message you get is corruption is a problem exclusive to poor countries, and rich countries don't have corruption. So for me, as someone who grew up in a developing country, in a post-colonial society, I want to push back against the implicit bias of this metric. That's what I'm trying to do. And what I'm trying to say is, you know what? That metric comes from the West, and it makes the West look good. In fact, conceptually, if you unbundle corruption into different types, we will understand that the difference between Nigeria and United Kingdom is not that the UK has no corruption and Nigeria has a lot of corruption. The difference is that Nigeria has visible, growth-damaging forms of corruption, and the UK has legal lies, sophisticated forms of corruption. That's the difference, but it's not reflected in the metrics, which are not being done by the Global South anyway. So what I try to do in my book is to offer everyone a simple, memorable framework for unbundling corruption into 4 different types. Okay, so let's first think about corruption on 2 dimensions. The first dimension is elites versus non-elites. So the kind of corruption that a top leader can do is very, very different from what, say, a street-level police officer can do. And the second dimension we want to distinguish between is corruption with theft and without theft. So extortion and embezzlement are forms of corruption with theft. Right? No one benefits except the person who takes from others. These forms of corruption are obviously and universally damaging to economic activities. Conversely, you have corruption with exchange. So you can think about petty bribery, where there's an exchange of small bribes, say for a faster business permit, but an exchange happens. This is, at least you could say, that whoever gave the small bribe got a benefit instead of being extorted for nothing. And then you have, you can imagine the 4th variety, where you have grand exchanges between business and political elites. And that's a very different kind of corruption. So when these 2 dimensions interact, it creates 4 types of corruption. The first type is what I call petty theft. And an example of this will be extortion. This is unfortunately common in many poor countries throughout the world, where regular people suffer from it. Right? Street vendors are extorted. They don't get any benefit out of it. It is completely growth damaging. And then the second type is grand theft. So these are examples of embezzlement, where powerful leaders siphon billions of dollars out of the country into Swiss bank accounts. Again, completely growth damaging. It drains public wealth No one benefits, roads are not built, infrastructure is not provided, trust is eroded. Bad, bad, bad corruption. And then you have what I call speed money. Speed money would be petty bribes that someone pays in order to overcome an obstacle, right? So a petty bureaucrat says, I'm not going to give you your business license until you make a small gift, right? So it's very common in developing countries that people are forced to pay speed money to overcome red tape. And then the fourth type is what I call access money. In this case, business actors are paying very large sums, sometimes, most of the time, not even money, because money is really not a very sophisticated form of exchange. But, lavish privileges in exchange for protection, privileges, lax regulations, tax breaks, monopoly rights, government procurement contracts from the government. And in this case, I call it access money instead of speed money because the individuals are paying for access. They're not paying to overcome red tape. And to use an analogy to make all of this really simple, think of it all as drugs. So petty theft and grand theft, I call them toxic drugs. Think of it as heroin. If you take heroin, it's definitely going to destroy your health and your life. And that is the most common type of corruption we see in many poor countries, and unfortunately in Africa as well. Speed money, think of it as painkillers, right? You have a headache, unfortunately, then you have to take some painkillers. It might remove your headache, but if you take too many painkillers, it's also not going to be good for your health. And then finally, access money is what I call steroids. Steroids are known as growth-enhancing drugs. It can help you grow big muscles fast. It can make you look like you are strong and muscular. But if you keep taking steroids, the harm is building up, and one day it will explode. And we have seen that in rich countries again and again, right? Just a reminder, 2008 US financial crisis. If you look at US history, there were many financial crises triggered or caused by access money. And we're seeing the same today in China. You see news about an impending financial meltdown, real estate bubbles. So that is all of the harms of access money building up and about to explode. So I hope that helps everyone to unbundle corruption and think about it as drugs, 4 types, all harmful. No corruption is ever good, but they harm in different ways. So be careful what drugs you take.